Hello, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of the 2023 North American Virtual Reference Conference. My name is Ava Burlett. My pronouns are she, her. I am the program lead for information literacy and instructional design at the University of Miami, which sits on the traditional homelands of the indigenous peoples of Florida, which includes the Tequesta, the Seminole, and the Miccosukee. Just some housekeeping statements before we get started. To the attendees, your video and audio have been turned off for the session. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions. This session will be recorded and made available on the conference website next week. Sessions are capped at 500 capacity. If the session is full, you can try again later, or you can try joining another session. Otherwise, recordings will be available on the website after the conference. So with housekeeping done, I will exit the stage and turn it over to Clara and Sandy, who will introduce themselves and their presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Ava. So we'll just take a little moment to share our PowerPoint with all of you. Is that working? Yes. Okay, excellent. So thank you for joining our talk today about unconventional partnerships, how to build a sustainable methodology to evaluate user needs. So we're coming to you from McGill University today. Okay. And so I'm Sandy, and I'm now the head librarian of the Nam Gelber Law Library at McGill. And I also serve as the virtual reference coordinator. So I oversee the entire virtual reference service for the library system. And previously, just a few months ago, I was a liaison librarian of the Humanities and Social Sciences Library. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Clara.
Hi, I'm Clara Terp. I'm the Discovery Systems librarian, so at McGill as well.
Yeah. So here's a look at what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to focus a lot about the partnership and how it came to be, the specific context of our institution, which kind of informs the project that we decided to undertake. We'll talk about the project itself, the methods that we used, some of our results, the overall outcome of the partnership and a future of it. And then we'll wrap it up with a little conclusion at the end. Right.
So I'll talk a little bit about partnerships. So to be able to kind of set the stage for this, I'll talk a bit about McGill University Libraries. So we have 10 library branches. We have one satellite office for technical services and cataloging that's in a separate building, kind of off campus, but near campus. There are 34 kilometers between the two furthest branches. So like the satellite office and McDonald campus, which is a campus set quite far away, there are 34 kilometers. So there's a physical distance between the different branches. There are very inconsistent remote work policies across the different branches. So I work in the satellite office branch, and we have a kind of open office hybrid mode where we come in once or twice a week in person, and we share desk and all that kind of we work situation. So we are often remote, where some branches come in every day. Some branch staff come in 4 days a week, while other bigger branches, they come in once or twice a week. So it kind of heavily depends on the different branch. So it's hard to know even if someone is at their office when you're passing by or all of that. So that makes it somewhat hard to build partnerships across the different departments. And there's not a whole lot of collaboration between units and branches. I think a lot of places are like that, where it's quite siloed, and it's hard to get across this different silos. So there's some collaboration when a project requires different collaboration, but there's not a lot of kind of naturally grown partnerships. So to facilitate, we had some thought, we talked a lot about partnership and collaboration and how to make that happen because we enjoyed working together. So we kind of try to find ways to collaborate. And while thinking about that, we came across a couple of things. And one of the things is very personal, but during COVID, I kind of realized that working remotely and working from home every day affected not really necessarily my day-to-day and my it's sometimes easier to focus from home. But when I work from home a lot, I kind of become less creative. I find it harder to get new ideas or bump into people and suddenly have a genius idea of how to solve everyone's problem, so to speak. So I find that once I got back and I started having informal conversation and spontaneous meetings and chatting with people in the hallway and going for coffee, I had tons of ideas of research projects and committees I'd like to start and things like that. And we find that that's really important for collaboration. So kind of the spontaneous, not always fruitful on the first meeting, informal meetings have a really, really big role to play in cross-departmental collaboration. It's essential to cross paths, and it's not always easy to do it virtually, to do it on Teams, especially with someone you don't previously know or you've never worked for. It could be kind of stressful to meet virtually. Of course, it helps when there's overlap between research interests or where you find areas where skills kind of complement each other. Those are quick, kind of easy way to do this, but to know what research interests people have, to know what skills they have that may be surprising, it's really useful when you're chatting around tea. Of course, you need commitment. You need to decide to make it happen. Sandy and I kind of came across and decided, okay, we're going to do something together and we're going to make it happen. And we're going to be accountable to each other and we're going to just keep track and make sure we're not just kind of saying it and then 6 months pass and saying it again. But with all of that comes kind of the institutional culture, and that's the aspect you can't necessarily change, but it helps if you're allowed to grab coffee with a colleague in the middle of the afternoon to chat or to do those types of things. That really helps create spontaneous conversation and help foster cross-departmental collaboration. So because this is the story of how we met, the power of informal conversations, we didn't really know each other well. We never really worked together on previous projects. We knew of each other. We thought we might be good fit. We thought we might have fun. So we went for tea. We're not big on coffee, so we went for tea specifically. And we chatted and we realized we liked each other enough to want to work more together. And so we kind of started thinking about what could we do? Where do our paths can cross? What are the skills that one can bring to another? And how can we make collaboration that will continue to be fruitful through the years? Not to be cheesy or anything.
Great. Thank you, Clara. So I'll tell you a little bit more about just the overall context. We talked about the McGill context and how we kind of came together having very different like librarian duties, right? And working very different units. But the more specific context that helped inform our research project. So specifically thinking about, so our research project really looked at, and we'll look at the questions in a moment, but really we wanted to look at, a cross section of our interests, right? I do a lot of research in virtual reference services. Clara does a lot of systems work. So we try to find somewhere where that intersected. So to give you a sense of virtual reference at McGill, it's been offered for a while, since 2006. We did have a platform change in August 2019. So previously we used OCLC's question point, which was discontinued, and we had to move to LibAnswers. And that's important because it's going to affect how we did the analysis of our project. The service is available to all students, staff, faculty members, and members of the overall community, right? We get questions from pretty much everyone. And people have 3 ways to reach us, either by live chat, email, or text messages. The service is staffed by 30 librarians, and we also have 4 virtual reference assistants who usually are graduate students in information science. There are 2-hour shifts staffed by 1 librarian or reference assistant to give you a sense of how busy it is. And it's usually available Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturday and Sunday from 12 to 5 p.m. So quite a bit of hours. So to give you also a sense of how busy we are. So this is a kind of a major chart since 2006. So since we started offering the service, and you can see like kind of a pretty steady increase. And then the very steep increase at the end is in 2020, 2021, when the pandemic hit, we received over twice the amount of questions that we would usually get. So because all other services were closed, it meant a very significant increase in the number of questions, which does have an impact on us for our purposes of our study. But you can see that it's a very well-used service, right? Over 3,000 questions in a regular year, and then during the pandemic, over 4,000, sometimes almost 5.
So that's where Sandy came from. I came from 5 major system changes in 3 years. So this is more or less since I became systems librarian, but WorldCat Discovery became the default. So we had a local version, kind of classic OPAC catalog interface. That was the main catalog that people used. And then on August 6th, we moved to the Discovery platform. So a big change for a lot of users. It became default, but it was still present until August, I'm skipping a line, until August 9, 2019, where that OPAC was retired and the Discovery platform became kind of the only system available for users. That retirement kind of matched when we migrated from Aleph up to WorldShare, so WorldShare management system, which is OCLC product, on May 1st, 2019. So we had the summer where we had our old system, and then we kind of retired that old system. So the catalog retired with this system in August. Then we joined the Quebec Consortium of Libraries on July 8, 2020. So there was a rebranding of the catalog, new functionalities. There were a lot more, we could do a lot more buttons and all that kind of thing. And a lot of changes in the policies and how people kind of could borrow books and where they could go, and a lot of new rules as well. And then in July 14th, 2021, so 1 year later, OCLC moved their WorldCat Discovery to a new version 2, which also came with a rebranding. So again, kind of a change for users. So 5 changes in 3 years, some more important than others. A lot affecting the public face of the catalog, so the Discover interface or the OPAC instead of, and some affecting also the backend, but that's more on librarians than on big for users. So what does it mean to have 5 major changes in 3 years? It's a lot of changes. It's really hard for both staff and users. And as a systems librarian, you get somewhat lost in the change management and the vocal discontent users, and the staff really like the old catalog and really like being able to search or browse by call number or do stuff that are somewhat harder in new Discovery platform. You hear a lot more from people who are extremely unhappy. So it becomes really easy to kind of get lost in this. So when I was talking to Sandy, I realized, but what about the data? Does this data actually support my intuition that system change is massive for users and they're very upset and it takes them forever to get used to it? Or is it kind of smooth sailing for users? So that brings us to our project.
Yeah. So that did inform our project. Again, intersection of much of our interests. So to give you kind of a sense of the timeline of when we started, when we had that initial tea and started to kind of brainstorm things that we might want to do together, up until this point when we're about to kind of submit it for publication. So we started talking about this in the fall of 2021, kind of starting to figure out, like just brainstorming our research interests and how we could align them and hopefully find out something interesting and learn new things at the same time. So we had that initial meeting in October 2021. We had a few follow-ups to like ideas to kind of refine what we wanted to actually do and what was doable in the amount of time that we had. And then in January 2021, that's when we really kind of 2022. That's when we really kind of firmed up the idea and decided this is what we're going to do. And we started again. We scheduled bi-weekly meetings. So every 2 weeks we would meet at a set time. Sometimes at my workplace, sometimes at Clara's, sometimes we would just meet at a cafe and have hot chocolate and work on this. To again, keep that accountability part that Clara mentioned, not just being like, oh yeah, we'll do this, but actually setting benchmarks for ourselves and meetings to work on this. And then, so we started looking at the methods and how we were going to actually do this. And Clara started doing a lot of work on the Python script, having a few iterations of that. So while Clara did that, I worked on more the lib review side of the writing and the research project. So Clara finished the final version of the script in June. So then we started doing the analysis, which we'll tell you about in a moment. So kind of a two-part analysis that we just finished, and then we just wrote it up and we're pretty much ready to submit it. All right, so what did our project actually entail? So much like Clara mentioned, we really wanted to see, okay, so those major system changes, how did they actually affect users? And that's something that we can track on virtual reference by the questions they're asking, right? We can just analyze what they're asking about. So overall, did it increase the number of questions? Like, did we see, peaks of more questions around those system changes, around the time of those system changes? But also, are those questions that they're asking related to the system changes? So are they asking about how to put a book on hold now, or how to log into their account? Like, are they asking questions about tasks or information related to the new system, or what looks like a new system to them? And finally, since we're using a slightly different methodology, one that hasn't been used a lot, it's kind of starting to get a bit of traction in virtual reference assessment. So we wanted to see if using this methodology was actually viable. Like, we hadn't used it before, and we wanted to see, like, is this something that could be potentially used more going forward? Okay. So what we started with is we really wanted to focus on, the questions that have been asked when the system changes occurred, right? And we saw that really great chart with all of the system changes that happened over 3 years. So we wanted to look around those times, how had things changed. And essentially, what we realized was that it was between 2018 and 2021. Like I mentioned previously, we had a major change of our virtual reference platform in 2019. Now, some of our previous transcripts have been kind of kept and have been transferred into our new platform, but they're very different and they're not necessarily that helpful, at least for our purposes. So that's why we decided to kind of start at 2019 when we have the new system with the complete transcript, so we could really get a sense. The other ones were just like the initial question, which sometimes is helpful, but sometimes people don't necessarily ask what they're looking for in their initial question. So we decided to really use the sample that had the complete transcripts. So we looked at September 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2021 to kind of give us a good 2 year of data. And there's some major changes that happened to the catalog in that period. So we could extrapolate some good findings from that.
Okay, sorry. So now we'll go in a little more details about our methodology. So what did I bring to the table in this partnership? I brought some coding skills. So for work, I do a fair bit of Python. For the little story, I learned mostly by myself or on the side. I don't have any formal degree or formal training on programming. So I don't do anything that crazy, but I can write a script and I can automate tasks. So what we decided to do is to use Python, which is the language I know best, to automate the analysis of VR interactions. So looking at both the question and the conversation. So as Sandy said, the way question point and lib answers save the responses would have meant a whole new different script. And that felt a little bit too ambitious for a first time running this methodology. So we thought it wouldn't be too dramatic if we started in September. So what did we gain with this? Well, we gained the possibility to study a much larger sample. If we were to do manual coding, we would have done probably a couple months, 1 month or 2 months around every system change, and compare that to other projects Sandy did, and kind of, we could have possibly had some answers, but manually coding every chat interaction for 2 years would have been more or less impossible. Well, it is possible. Very, very time consuming, and we wouldn't be able to talk to you about this project right now, or we would have had to have a bigger team. So it was really nice to be able to study a larger sample. And on a very personal note, I thought it would be really cool to try to develop this methodology and to try to figure out if we can automate the analysis. And is that result interesting and valuable? Or is it kind of flawed and we're better off manual? So I built a script and we ran it 5 times. So it was an iterative process. And it was highly based on my skill sets. So the caveat is I don't really know machine learning. I don't really feel comfortable building a machine learning tool. With anything that is natural language, machine learning would be a couple steps above what we did, and we are aware of that. But since I don't have those skills and we don't have the budget to buy fancy software, we couldn't really do that. So we thought, with my skill sets, with our budget, which is $0, what can we achieve that will give us a good example and will give us a good, at least, basis of a methodology that we could maybe develop with years. So how did we start? We start by looking through conversation, looking through chat, and based on our experience with the system and me knowing kind of the questions I usually get transferred to me, we identify the main themes we wanted to pull out of the VR script. So we chose and defined 5 themes. We have actions, renewing, placing a hold, placing an ILA request, all those kind of main current actions that users do in a library system. We had login, which was mostly, I don't know how to log in. I have problem logging in. It's not recognizing me, mostly login issues or questions about how to log in. A lot of that was clearing cache and cookies and doing that whole thing. We had accounts. That was mostly what can I borrow? What am I allowed to borrow in the consortium or not? What does my account allow me to do? That type of thing. Or once I'm in my account, what can I see? What can I do in my own account? We had consortial questions. So this was mostly anytime one of the 17 other universities, part of our consortium, name was in the chats. We included it as a consortial question. So whether it's a Concordia student wanting to borrow a book from McGill, for example, and wondering how that happens, or any question about the shared platform or the BC, it's called BCI. So anytime someone mentioned BCI, we figured it was a consortial question. And then catalog was mostly basic catalog, the thing they see and type on And how can I get a map of the stacks? How can I filter? What does it look like? It was rebranded. What is Sophia? All those types of questions. Sophia is the name of the shared platform. So those were kind of the themes we looked at and tried to identify. And then with those themes, we identified specific patterns. So Python script was built using regular expression. So regular expression is a language that allows you to match patterns with wildcards, more or less. So you can build kind of a sentence that would tell you take any login, if there's a space, if there's no space, if there's a capital, if it's all capital, if it's all lowercase, all the different iteration. It allows you to create a sentence or a word or a kind of a long string of text that will go through all these different options and will return matches if matches work any of these options. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. We wanted to look through patterns and match patterns based on themes. So cookies, cache, login, logging, all those types of words or sentences or combinations of words. That's what we were looking for. We looked at both the question and the conversation. So if the question was very clear and had all the keywords we were looking for, that kind of automatically went in a category. Otherwise, we looked through the conversation between the librarian and the library user. And sometimes we were looking for keywords that the librarian would use because we had kind of suggested scripts that they could use or answers, kind of pre-canned answers that we could use to bump up the matching process, or if the user used a lot of words. This was an iterative process because once we ran the script a couple times, we would manually code a section, we'd identify all the errors, and then I would update the script to remove all of the errors. So I would go through it and say, oh, actually, we want to not match if it's using the word terrace pickup, or because COVID led us into a world of terrace pickup. And we didn't want that to be matched. So we would unmatch specific things based on keywords as well, or we'd find what was the flaw in the pattern, and I would kind of improve the pattern to match exactly what we were looking for. So this iterative process happened 5 times, 5 different versions of the script, every time with less and less results. I think the first script probably matched 90% of all chat interaction, which sounded really impressive for a systems librarian, but definitely there's not that many questions about the catalog. So then it became more precise and we kind of got less and less questions about the catalog.
Yeah. Okay. So then what we did, like when I mentioned this was kind of a 2-part evaluation, is that because we're using a new method, we thought it would be good to rely on a method that's more traditionally used to evaluate VR conversations, just to kind of check if it's a viable method for us to evaluate what's happening in those conversations. So what we did is, out of the selection that the script made, right? So what the script said, yes, this conversation is about the system change. We coded a sample of those questions to make sure that it was accurate, right? So we used a sample size calculator to establish our sample to make sure that it was a 95% confidence rate with a 5% confidence interval. So what we were really looking for and trying to code for was, well, should it be part of the sample, right? So as our script like identified this properly, and also what's the main theme of the question? So not only as it, assigned it as yes, the system changed, but has it given it the proper theme? Like, is it about an account login issue, so on and so forth. And to do that, we made sure that we agreed on the cases that were a little bit more challenging, because if you've done kind of any type of virtual reference or any type of reference, you'll know that very often a conversation is about more than one thing, right? People may ask about how to use the catalog, but they might also ask about citation style at the same time. And we coded for only one thing And we wanted to make sure that, we kind of agreed on what those questions were. So here's a look at the sample, just to give you a sense. We started with a total of 9,360 transcripts. And then with the script, we narrowed that down to just a little bit over 1,000. And then that gave us a sample that we manually coded of 300. So we did half, and then checked the ones that were more, a little bit more difficult to narrow down.
Okay, so the results, I'll go quickly because we really wanted to focus on the methodology, but I thought we might pique your interest during this talk. So a bit about the results. So what did we find? We did find that there was a slight increase in September 2019, which was after the biggest system changes. In the summer of 2019, we had a lot of those changes. So September, there was quite a lot of questions. Well, no, slight increase of questions. We did have a peak of 303 questions in July 2020 overall, which coincides with the library joining the consortium and the rebranding of the user interface. And in August 2021, the increase correlates with the implementation of version 2. August and July are usually pretty slow months where we don't get questions. So slight peak, but still an increase. Here's kind of a chart of the overall in light blue, or the lightest color. We have the overall number of questions total, and then the darker blue we have related to the catalog. So it's not the biggest, but it still gives us an idea of what months were kind of higher than others. So what does this mean? We could say that the system affects users and results in an increase of questions received at reference. Is it a dramatic increase? No, in no measure. It's not a huge difference. Are results affected by COVID? Yes, a million times yes. We can't really get around it. We'd have to redo it in maybe 5 years to see if it still, if we get the same results. And our methods were not, we matched and we looked at the manual coding, and the manual coding gave us an error rate of about 7% for the specific yes, no. So what consisted of the sample, and of those 7, there was kind of no way around it. We would have, it was automatically used because, well, users can use the term catalog to mean a database that has nothing to do with our specific catalog, and it's really hard to get around that. So nothing really dramatic that we actually found, but there was some increase, and there seemed to be a little tendency that it does affect virtual reference. In other words, there's a learning curve, but it's not huge. What we actually kind of think, this is an hypothesis, but every year the university gets a lot of new students. Every year it's a new catalog for a lot of people. So we get kind of general questions about the catalog at all times, and some didn't even know it was a new system. So I think that affects the impact, because it's not a set amount of users that are always, like the librarians who have gotten really used to the system. The faculty members got used to the system a lot, but a lot of the users, it was a new system no matter what it was. So they didn't necessarily, it didn't bring to an increase in questions.
Okay, now some of the outcomes and future of the collaboration. So in terms of practical implications for all of you out there running a VR service or participating in it, just from what we found, even if they're not necessarily massive increase, we did find that people ask questions about it, right? And that's to be expected whenever you have a major system change. So like librarians should be ready to anticipate some of those questions that may come up, but also should be trained on how to respond to them, right? Like if we find that certain questions are coming up more about like how to do actions or log into their account, librarians should be ready to kind of provide that information. They should also be well informed about the circulation policies in place. Like for this study, we didn't look at policies. We actually excluded that from the Python script. But just anecdotally, we saw that there were a lot of questions about policies, especially once we joined the consortium, because a lot of our borrowing policies changed. So that's something to anticipate. And they, librarians, and if you have staff members that also provide virtual reference, should be well trained on the use of the new system so that they can actually assist users. And it would be also important for the library to have strong communication to share any like upcoming changes, how it's going to affect the users, and also provide training, right? Which is something librarians do. We go into classes, we provide training on the new systems, which might explain why the kind of period to acclimate is not massive, right? People have access to a lot of resources to help them. So what are some of our next steps? So we're, like I mentioned previously, planning to disseminate this research, and we want to explore this research method some more to kind of identify the subject of reference questions. So if people are asking like in-depth reference questions to help them with their papers, their assignments, which departments are they in? Like which fields of study are they in? Which can then help us kind of target our instruction. For me, a very selfish project is to look at the questions that are related to law and legal research. So what are people asking and what could be helpful for law librarians to provide? And we just want to overall investigate the use of natural language processing to kind of improve our matching results, to kind of narrow that 7% error rate and make it a little bit smaller.
That one's for me.
And what are some of the outcomes of the collaboration, since so much of this presentation focused on that? I think it was really neat that we kind of all brought very different skill set, right? I had the kind of VR research background, and Clara brought all the wizard tech skills, as I like to call them. So that made, it enabled us to create a research project that would otherwise have been impossible. Like I could never have written a Python script and looked at 2 years of data by myself. Like that would have been completely impossible. We learned from each other, I think. I'm not nowhere near writing a Python script, but I do feel like I have a way better understanding of natural expression now. We made some unexpected discoveries, which I thought was neat. And it has led to more, increased collaboration in the future. I think we can say we kind of became friends throughout this process. So we're definitely planning more collaboration and across our units too. So trying to enable the people we work with to kind of work with each other.
This is the Disney part of the collaboration. Yes. So that's what we had for you. If you have any questions, we're here for a bit. Thank you so much for coming. I think the next slide maybe we had, thank you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you both so much. That was such a great presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just a reminder for attendees, you can use the question and answer function. I'm also monitoring the chat to ask questions, and we do have time for questions now. Sandy and Clara, I do have a question for you to give our attendees some time to bring their own questions to the chat or the Q&A. I wanted to know if will you be using the results of your research for decision making, and if you will, what areas do you think that kind of decision making could happen in?
This is not necessarily a fun answer, but yes and no.
Okay.
I think the results of our research confirmed kind of intuitions,
right,
that we should communicate changes to users. We should tell them in advance. We should provide user training. So I think in that way, it's always good to say, hey, it's actually important. So that will be useful. And I know I'm often in the project management team of any system changes. So I think I'll bring that forward, and that's going to stay close to my mind, but it kind of already was as a, kind of thing your mind comes up with.
Yeah. And for virtual reference, I'm thinking just of like possibilities for training, like just sharing information with librarians who are then going to share it with users. And just like my own team now at the law library, like making sure that everyone is very aware of systems changes, like Clara mentioned, because we can definitely see an impact.
That's excellent. I love that. Let's see. So we still have time for questions and answers. Please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat. I do have, not to take up all of your time. Oh, it looks like we do have a question in the Q&A. I can read it aloud for you guys. So, do the chats in your system get tagged by service providers? If so, comparing the tags against your Python script may also help to validate the method. Barbara has been has been working on a transcript analysis project as well and trying to devise methods that would allow them to gain insight without manual coding. And she thanks you for sharing your approach.
Thank you for the question, Barbara. I can answer that one if you want.
Go.
So we don't use tagging. It is available in the service that we use, but we don't currently use it. It's something I'm kind of thinking about, but I think that if we were to use it, we would have to make sure that everyone is tagging things the same way, which can be a little difficult. Because again, and I've done a lot of transcript analysis at this institution, very often you have more than one question in one interaction. So then how do you code that? How do you, especially I've found, even working with other librarians who've done a lot of VR research, coding for level of difficulty of the question is very difficult. Like we can, we've agreed very easily on, what is the question about most of the time, but assigning it like, this is like, if you use a read scale or any other method, it becomes very difficult because for me, a question can be super complicated and very easy for Clara and vice versa. So we don't use it, but I'm thinking about it. And it would definitely be one way to kind of help automate that process, but I would still do a manual analysis just because my understanding of questions might be different.
It's good that Sandy answered because I would be like, what? Let's do it. It's going to be so easy. Before.
Next pilot project, we'll try it.
But we didn't really say that in the presentation, but even the definition of our own category, we realized some of them we should have defined more, like account and login is kind of close. All those things, it's really easy to define, but those definitions really have to be really good and really clear. So we'd have to kind of find that out. But thank you. Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the consistency is key. Yeah, otherwise it's kind of useless. Let us know though if you use it and it works great and you have a methodology. We'd love to hear about it. Wonderful.
Yeah, we have lovely audience members. I think everyone's kind of working on things like that. So it's great to hear from our attendees as well. So other questions and answers you can put in the Q&A. I do have one more question. I wonder what advice you would give to people in other institutions for seeking out these types of relationships or partnerships.
Yeah, I find, and like we were talking about this too, like we were working from home for a while, and I think the most interaction we've had before is maybe scooping ice cream together at an ice cream social like 5 years ago. So like, and online, it's kind of awkward because you're not going to send a Teams message to, well, very rarely to someone you don't know, right? Like you may have like your core groups of like, work friends who you Teams with all the time. But it's kind of a little awkward to reach out to someone you've never met, right? So like being back in person and running into each other in person kind of definitely helps. I'd say just sometimes it's just fun to hear like what our colleagues are working on and then reach out to people. Like librarians tend to be like a very kind breed of people. And just find like interests, and like I think we're both really big on collaborations. We're just like, I'm gonna work with all the units in the library. That's a goal. But yeah, not being afraid to reach out to people and being like, hey, you did this like really cool project. How about we have coffee and talk about it?
Yeah, I find that that's I somewhat had a secret agenda because Sandy's really good at publishing, and I was kind of overwhelmed. So I was like, I was in the tenure, I'm in the close to the end of the tenure track process. So it's kind of, who can I partner with? And I was like, Sandy, I think Sandy would be great. It's way easier to be like, want to go for tea than like how about writing a paper together? We never talk, but so I think those like informal conversations do help. And even if you come in with an agenda, you don't have to say, Sandy learned that today. Okay, but yeah, I think that helps. And for me, it's systems librarian is really about relationships. It's really important to know what's happening in the different units in the different branch. It's a big part of my work. And I try to do it actively, but it takes time, and you have to accept that it takes time and it takes effort, and you have to just reach out to people, strike conversations, be friendly, and consider that part of work too. I find it easy to be like, oh, I just lost 15 minutes talking to someone near the bathroom and now I don't have time to work, but it's not lost. It's not a waste of time. It's actually very, very useful and amazing.
Yeah. I love those points, especially as we're coming back in person and seeing people in person more and more. So I think we can have one more question if we have one more question either from the chat or in the Q&A.
If you have an idea of a question later, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. We'll be happy to share any other information you'd like to know.
Hi. That's a great note to end on. So let's conclude there. So thank you all for attending. Thank you to Sandy and Clara for presenting. This is such a great session, so exciting. So thank you so much. For our attendees, please check our schedule to see what the upcoming sessions are, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.